Maidstone's Climate Action in Education webinar. My name is Gemma Bailey. I work for a programme called Climate Ambassadors. We are a programme that is national, however, started at the University of Reading. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that programme later on. However, I want to talk more, first of all, about some background to why I'm here, why we are all here, and the work the Department for Education have been doing around this as well. So, hopefully a few of you have seen these coloured stripes that are behind me and on the screen now. This is just a nice introductory slide that I always like to get started with. This actually shows the temperature warming from about 1850 to 2020 through this pictorial depiction using kind of each coloured stripe as a line of the average temperature for that year. So obviously the red stripes being the slightly warmer stripes and the blue stripes being the cooler stripes. It was created by Professor Ed Hawkins, who's based at the University of Reading, which is where I'm based, and it has been used globally now to show climate change, and it just is a great way to start discussions. Technically defined, climate change is the long-term shift in the average temperature and weather patterns across the world. But really today I want to go more into why it's important for us and why it's important for young people. So on the screen now, you can see a slightly edited version of these wonderful climate stripes, and you'll see there is a bar where it says 2020. Beyond 2020, there are 5 different scenarios, and each of these different scenarios depends on the actions that we take moving forward. So in the very high scenario, we take very minimal action. In fact, we actually increase those actions, which increase greenhouse gas emissions being released into the atmosphere. And so we see warming continue, and we see warming get to a very, very high point. However, in the very low scenario, we take very positive action now. We start to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions we're releasing because of our activities, and we start to see our temperature, global temperature, and the average temperature stabilise. Now, the most important thing that I want people to see on this, and us as the education sector, and why it's so important, is looking at actually those that are born in 2020. You'll see that those that are born in 2020 will never experience the temperatures that we have experienced, and they will experience a whole new climate moving forward throughout the period of their life. And that is the really important thing to raise to educators. We are now looking after and teaching the individuals that are going to be facing ultimately the consequences of climate change and the impacts of climate change. So those born in 2020, obviously they're our lovely early years students, and they are facing an uncertain future. So we are part of that collective that can help to support them and help them to understand what the future might look like and how they can help change it as well. The thing is, we don't want to just talk about climate change, though. We want to talk about sustainability as a whole. So a lot of you may well have heard of the phrase sustainability. In fact, some of you on the call today may have been the designated sustainability leads for your education settings. But ultimately, sustainability is trying to meet our own needs without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. What we're trying to do here is we're trying to embed and trying to basically take a more holistic view of kind of our global societal issues. And so we are thinking about the environment, social aspects, as well as economic aspects. So instead of just looking at the environment or just looking at the economy, for example, we are considering all of these factors. And that is really, really important when it comes to taking climate action. We cannot just do this in isolation. You cannot just focus on the environment. You've got to include the social and economic factors for these changes to really, really work. And that's the same in your education settings as well. But why is climate action important in the education sector? Well, the education system in England and Wales is a big contributor to climate change, and the other part of that will also be strongly affected by it. So education is the public sector's largest emitter of carbon from buildings, accounting for about 37% of public sector emissions. Now, admittedly, that does include universities as well. However, it is a large percentage, but this is not me putting that on you, okay? This is actually far more than just the education sector. You know, there's a lot of other areas and sectors and the government that need to get involved to support the decarbonisation of the education sector. However, it's always worth raising the point that actually, as a sector, there is a lot of contributions to global warming from education. The thing is, though, it's not all about that. And obviously we are talking about education here, so we are talking about the pupils, the students that we are teaching. And so up here on the slide, you'll see a number of different statistics from various different studies that have been taken over the past 5 years on both student but also teacher views as well. So just a couple to pick out of. So one on the end here done by Global Action Plan is that 77% of students feel anxious when thinking about climate change. So you may have heard about the kind of I would say, new mental health topic that has been coming up, which is eco-anxiety. It's the fact that a lot of young people today see obviously huge problems about the climate and the climate warming, and see the impacts of this globally, and ultimately feel quite anxious about their future, which is fully understandable. And so it's about how can we combat that, and how can we actually make young people instead feel empowered to make a difference rather than feel intimidated or feel scared. At the same time, 68% feel that climate education should be included across all subjects. Okay, so actually young people are showing and actually saying within these surveys that they actually want to learn more as well. At the same time, teachers don't necessarily feel prepared. So Teach the Future, which is a campaign group, they did a study and they found that 70% of teachers do not feel ready to teach about climate change and sustainability. However, UNESCO did a study in 2021 and 95% of teachers find teaching about sustainability and climate change extremely important. So it's not just the students that we need to support, but it is also teachers as well. And so these are two more reasons why it's important in the education sector. And the final couple of reasons, one is around biodiversity and the nature that we have here in the UK. So if you combine the grounds of all the education settings across England, they will take up an area twice the size of Birmingham. So that is a huge area, and also gives lots of opportunities for supporting UK wildlife and helping it to thrive as well. We also want to think about trying to get young people out into nature to foster that connection with nature. So 88% of children and young people agreed that being in nature made them very happy. That was a study done by Natural England in 2023. But in the same year, WWF did a study, and only 27% of schools surveyed have actually integrated outdoor learning into their curriculum. So there are opportunities for us to actually be able to better get young people out into nature. The other thing we've got to factor in, though, as a sector, is the fact that actually we are actually going to face and be vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. So on the screen here, it says that just so nearly 11,000 schools currently are exposed to a significant chance of flooding. However, if by 2050 temperatures rise by 2 degrees, then that will rise to over 15,000 schools. And I'm sure some of you on the call today have experienced problems with flooding, whether that be many years ago or more recently. But factually, we are going to start to see warmer and wetter winters, which means that flooding, unfortunately, is going to become a higher likelihood as well. The other thing, though, is surveys have also found that lots of teachers are taking action now to actually reduce classroom temperature. We've had just a very, very hot week just now, obviously, and are kind of still in the middle of that period. And it says on here 90% had taken action to reduce classroom temperature. I would argue that most teachers I've spoken to have actually taken some action to reduce classroom temperature or try to cool their students down. Now, a lot of people say this has been happening for years, and yes, there have been very, very hot days for years and years and years. However, with climate change, the thing that we're going to see is we're going to see the frequency of these hot days increase and these hot spells increase. So instead of just a couple of days a year of these really, really hot days, we're going to start to see potentially several weeks of these very hot periods. So how are we going to manage that, and how are we going to support both school to run as normal, but also actually our young people to still learn as well? So some of you have hopefully seen this, but the Department for Education released a sustainability and climate change strategy back in 2022. Just to say to everyone, this is up for renewal at the minute. So they are currently actually doing a strategy refresh that hopefully by the new academic year will have been published. But within this strategy, they stated that they would like all education settings by 2025 to have a sustainability lead and a climate action plan. Obviously, you're all aware we are in 2025 right now. And so this has been caveated. And really, they are saying now, by September or the end of 2025, they would like education settings to be in this position. We understand from the new strategy refresh, this isn't going to change. They are asking for education settings to take this step. One thing I would say, though, is this is not statutory, okay? So this is not going to be added to an Ofsted framework or anything like that. However, hopefully I've demonstrated there are lots of reasons to start taking climate action rather than just because the Department for Education are saying so. At the same time, the reason the DfE have started to put this forward is because this is a matter they are starting to take much more seriously, because they understand that the education sector is a sector that can make a lot of changes, but also needs to be a support for the young people and kind of the next generation moving through as well. Now, when we talk about sustainability leadership, it's up to each individual education setting to decide the structure of whether they have a sustainability lead or sustainability leadership team. Now, one thing to say is that best practice does show that change is going to be delivered when driven by a diverse team of passionate individuals. So it may be that you on the call are the sustainability lead for the call, or for your school, or know someone that is. One thing I would say is that it's a very, very good idea to have a team around you. You don't necessarily have to call them an official sustainability team, but making sure that you are not just doing this on your own is really, really important, because it is obviously going to be much more challenging when you are on your own. It's important to include several different groups of people when looking at climate action planning and when taking climate action in your school and taking that whole setting approach. Senior leadership teams, governors, trustees, executive leaders, if you're part of a multi-academy trust, the central multi-academy trust teams as well, these people are going to be really critical for planning and for any implementation to be successful. So if you are a teacher and a sustainability lead, it is very important that you do go and have conversations with your senior leaders about this, because you will need their support to be able to actually implement some of the changes that you want to make. Learners are really important. They help to inspire enthusiasm, help drive positive change, but more than anything, by including learners, it gives them a sense of agency, and that's what we want. There's been a lot of teaching young people about climate change and about the problems and the impacts. What there hasn't been a lot of so far is actually teaching them how they can change things and how they can be part of that movement of change. And by including them in climate action planning, it really does give them that sense of agency and helps them to be proactive and feel like they can make a difference as well. Teachers are really critical to this, that they are on the ground, okay? They are going to be the individuals actually teaching young people about making changes and making differences, whilst also actually implementing some of the more operational changes on your site. So they can help to identify where climate change and sustainability actually fits within the curriculum and help to embed it into learning and into culture as well. Estate management, I would say your final, actually, I'm not going to say final because there's one group that I've forgotten to add to the slide here, but estates management, they have a really good operational knowledge. So obviously people who deal with your waste, or the people who fix any leaks, the people who are looking after your grounds, they know your education setting operationally better than anyone else. And therefore, when you are looking to make changes in areas such as decarbonisation, then you are going to need their support to be able to actually make these changes, because they understand what is feasible and what is possible. The other group that I haven't put on this slide that I would add is governors, okay? What we are seeing a lot of schools do now is take an approach where they actually have a sustainability governor. And I expect you have someone on your governing board right now who would actually be very, very passionate about taking that duty on and actually looking at sustainability along with you and those others within your school that create your sustainability team. Having that sustainability governor will also help the hold you to account in terms of the plan as well, and actually they might be able to support in terms of any actions that you come up with for your plan. So next on is a climate action plan. So like I said, the Department for Education are asking for all education settings to have a climate action plan, really by September 2025, but by the latest by the end of the year. When we talk about a climate action plan, though, it is likely that you are already taking a lot of action. However, what the DfE are asking for is for you to actually create a more detailed plan to help your education setting or your trust to progress or commence these sustainability initiatives. Outside of that, they haven't provided loads and loads of guidance. And the reason for that is they want there to be some flexibility in terms of how schools approach this. And so there are 4 key areas that the Department for Education would like your climate action plans to cover. They do not have to be split into these 4 areas, but looking into actions that cover these 4 areas are really important. And that is decarbonisation, adaptation and resilience, biodiversity, and climate education and green careers. A really important thing to say about an action plan is it's not just a to-do list, okay? A climate action plan really should be a strategic document. And I'm not telling you to go away and to create some huge strategic document that is going to kind of last you for the next kind of 10 years by September. That's a huge job. However, do try and look at this more strategically. So potentially look at what you're going to achieve in the next academic year, and then beyond that, maybe what you might look to achieve by 2030. And along the way, you are going to want goals. So you're going to need your clear goal and purpose. The actions, so those activities that are going to help you achieve that goal, and then breaking that down into really achievable bite-sized steps that others within your setting can actually help you with. Timelines are really important, which is why I mentioned why it's a good idea to maybe think about next academic year, what can you achieve, and then beyond that to 2030, but also really do think about the resources. We find that 3 of the main barriers to action in schools with climate action is just like with most things, to be fair, is staff time, funding and expertise, okay? So staff time. Can you give your sustainability lead a little, or can you as a sustainability lead ask for a little bit more time? I know it is very difficult within a school to get this, but as we are coming kind of towards the end of the year, there might be some more flexibility in timetables. See if you can get a little bit of extra time to sit down with someone and have a conversation about this. Funding, okay, that is where we come into play. We cannot provide you with funding, I'm really sorry, and there is not loads of funding out there. However, we can point you in the right directions as to where you might be able to get funding, but also provide you with support that is free as well. Expertise, okay, so your sustainability lead, your leadership team, but also others in your school might not necessarily have the expertise. Again, this is where some of the support programs that I'm going to talk about soon will come into play and hopefully support you. Also, very important to think about where you're reporting this and where you're tracking progress. A lot of the time we're seeing schools start to look at a climate action plan alongside improvement planning, and they're starting to embed this within improvement planning and having this as a key feature of their improvement plan as well. A few other things that might be worth considering is who actually is going to own and develop that climate action plan. One of the points to raise here is that if you are part of a multi-academy trust, for example, and if you are a school within a trust, has your trust taken any action in this area? It's always worth going and having a conversation with them, because it might be that your trust is actually already looking at developing some form of sustainability strategy or climate action plan from a trust level, and then they are going to look to pass something down to schools that can then be adapted for each setting. That is something we are also encouraging trusts to do, because it does tend to work as quite a nice model. However, it might be that you as a school have to be the little spark that ignites that movement. Okay, so I can't stress enough, if you are part of a trust, please try and engage your trust with this conversation. Again, the additional training, which I just mentioned, but also how's it going to fit within your governance structures and where is progress going to be reported? And finally, how are you going to communicate this with your wider community? Okay, one of the best things to do initially when you are starting to look at sustainability or climate action within your schools is to actually tell your school community that that's what you're doing. And the reason for that is that you will hopefully be able to get a lot of support. It is likely that there is someone in your school community, whether it be a parent, carer, guardian, local business, or just someone lives locally within the community, that works in or works sort of within some form of green career, and therefore might be able to help you on this journey. So first of all, definitely putting it out to governors, to parent governors, but then also actually put it out in newsletters as well that might go out to parents and carers, just because actually you might get some support back and get some free help. So I'd really, really encourage you to communicate this and put things on your website and into newsletters when you're starting to take action. So when we look at these 4 areas, I'm just going to break down what we mean by each of them. So decarbonisation, a lot of you have probably heard this word a lot. What we mean by this is trying to reduce our emissions. So reduce those greenhouse gas emissions that we are releasing as part of our activities and actions, and support students to actually be part of the transition to net zero. So when we say net zero, what we're trying to do is reduce those emissions as much as possible, okay, to a point where ultimately we are not releasing any anymore. However, one thing to caveat here is that you as a school are going to struggle to get to completely net zero purely because of the systems we are within at the minute. So don't get me wrong, this is looking at you as a setting. How far can you go to get to net zero while still systems are changing around us as well? But what does this actually look like in practice? So what we're actually looking to do is decrease emissions through changes to several different areas and categories. So energy and utilities being a key one. Some of you, for example, might have solar panels on your roof, but we're looking more beyond that. I don't want you to just think of those big structural changes, because actually what we tend to see is most of the changes made and the benefits come through small behavioural changes. Okay, so whether that be switch off campaigns around your school, looking at what's left on overnight, over weekends, and most importantly during school holidays, particularly summer holidays. You're not only going to reduce your greenhouse gas emissions as an organisation, but what you're also going to do is save a lot of money if you start switching off energy. Okay, so energy and utilities is really important. Purchasing and services, so looking at procurement, so looking at where you're buying things from. Could you potentially buy things from more local sources? Could you see if the organisations you're buying things off of actually have any sustainability strategies themselves or any kind of goals themselves? And do they align with where you want to go? Transport, you've probably done a lot of work in this area already round the topic of air quality, I expect, rather than looking at reducing emissions. However, as well, there is the co-benefit that actually by looking at things like more active travel, you can also reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So things like the active travel campaigns, things like cycling proficiency weeks. Also, though, not just looking at those of your students getting to school, but also looking at your staff as well. Okay. The other thing to look in under this area, transport, is also things like school trips and the use of your minibus and vehicles like that. And can any changes be made there? Food is separate to waste management, okay? But when we talk about food, we do talk about food waste as well. Food waste is a huge contributor to climate change, because if food waste ends up in landfill and it decomposes, then what you get is the release of methane, which is an incredibly potent greenhouse gas emission. And so there is a huge push and campaign at the minute to try and ensure that everyone is actually separating their food waste and it is being disposed of appropriately. It is actually now your duty by law to actually separate your waste, and so you do have to now be recycling as a school. If you need any support with that, I would probably encourage you to go to Angela, who's on the call here, to your local authority or to whoever manages your waste, and say to them, we understand under the new waste regulations that we need to be separating our waste better. Can you help us with this? Okay. Your waste contractor knows that this needs to be done, and they will have different programs to support you. So I really do encourage you to do this. The other part, though, of food is actually looking about the food that we have in our canteens and the food that we're selling and the food that our students are eating. I'm not telling you all to go away to your caterers and say, right, we need to have an entirely vegan menu. However, what I am saying is, could we potentially have, for example, a meat-free Monday once a week, which helps to reduce our meat intake and actually show and do a little education piece around that. As well as that, looking at local and locally produced and seasonal produce as well. I expect this is something your caterers already have kind of on their agenda, purely because there are more and more education settings going to caterers and saying to them, right, what are you doing in terms of your environmental credentials? Also, there is the co-benefit that a lot of this ties in with healthy eating. So once again, just like with waste contractors, I would encourage you to speak to your caterers around this topic as well. And then water use is on here purely because there is kind of some energy used through water usage. So looking at leakages and things like that, but that also has the co-benefit in another area that we're going to talk about later, which is here actually, adaptation and resilience. So this is an area that a lot of people don't really know how to tackle or don't know what it means. So what we are trying to do here is to adapt our buildings and systems to prepare for the effects of climate change. Unfortunately, because of climate change, we are going to see a lot of impacts, and we arguably are already seeing them even in the UK. As I mentioned earlier, we are going to start to see warmer and wetter winters and much hotter and much drier summers, particularly in the southeast in Kent. That is going to be very, very true. And we are arguably going to see those hotter temperatures and those drier summers as well. So some people, for example, may have already experienced levels of drought where reservoirs have dried up over the past 5 years, but that could potentially increase. So what does this look like in practice? So we could say that we've got 3 elements to this. The first being reducing the effects of overheating and something like flooding through those physical or operational changes to site. So for example, if you have incredibly hot rooms, have you got blinds? Could you add solar film to the outside of the windows, which actually helps reflect the rays? Could you introduce some sort of canopy on an outside area which provides more shade? Could you plant more trees in areas to provide more shade for outside learning opportunities as well? Could you even create some sort of pergola outside or some sort of wooden structure that actually allows you to have almost like an outdoor classroom? I'm not talking anything really big and fancy. I'm just talking about a sheltered area that is in shade that could be used on those really, really hot days. At the same time with flooding, have you looked at your drainage? Do you know where you flood, and do you have any problems with flooding on your site? The idea here is trying to use nature to best combat this as well. For example, in a field, if you have a particularly boggy area where you get lots of runoff, could you do some planting around that area to help actually soak up some of that water? Obviously with the co-benefit as well, that you are then actually supporting your local biodiversity as well. Now, those things obviously can be quite expensive. So the other thing that we want to do is actually develop resilience in education provision to extreme weather events. And so what else can we do? For example, could we look at uniform policies? Could we think about how our students have to dress in the summer months, and even how our staff have to as well? And could there be some flexibility on very, very hot days? Constantly when we talk about this, I have conversations about sports days, and for the first time ever, actually last week, I had a school say to me that they've permanently moved their sports day to before May half term because they don't want to have the reserve days and the constant cancellations anymore. I know that's not going to be possible for everyone, but just to show that schools are starting to think about this in a slightly different way now, which is fantastic. And in terms of that resilience as well, like I said, could you potentially move lessons to different places when you are unable to teach in those very, very hot times? And if it is going to flood, do you have a plan for if it floods and where your students go? Okay, a lot of looking at adaptation and resilience is thinking about your risk and your risk to those changing weather types. The other thing I haven't even mentioned here is extreme storms as well. Very, very windy scenarios, for example, trees coming down. Are you vulnerable to those sorts of things? Ultimately, when looking at adaptation and resilience, the best place to start is do almost like a climate risk assessment. So have a look to see if you can find some, and I can provide you with some links and things, which I will do in the follow up to this, but have a look to see what your risk is in your certain area and see maybe, okay, this is what we could be faced with. This is where we're vulnerable as a site and where our staff and students might be vulnerable. Let's think about how we can make a change. And that comes into the third point here as well. So it's developing learner and staff resilience to a changing environment while considering the effects of eco-anxiety. So are our staff and students resilient to these impacts? Okay. For example, I was having a conversation again last week at an event I was at with a SEND school who said that when they experience really, really hot days, they really struggle to manage some of their young people. A lot of that is because of regulation of body temperature and the fact that they have to be very, very on it when in terms of those young people potentially putting themselves in vulnerable positions, sitting out in the sun too long, keeping a jumper on and things like that. And so they have to obviously be a lot more on it and watch a lot more. At the same time, they also said that when there's really, really heavy rain unexpectedly, then it can also distract the students, okay, a lot as well. So there's lots of different aspects to this, and it's about how we become more resilient to these changes. At the minute, you tend to find, and this isn't just in the education sector, this is generally, I would say, society is very reactive to these things. And instead, it's about planning and thinking, right, if something like this happens, this is what we're going to do. Biodiversity. So within biodiversity sector, what we want to do is enhance biodiversity, also has the co-benefit of improving air quality and help to increase access to and connection with nature. So what does this look like in practice? So very simply to start, it's about increasing biodiversity in and around your education setting. Now, I'm not standing here saying that all of you have amazing, huge outdoor spaces. I know that you won't, because a lot of schools around the country do not. However, where can you make changes and where can you make differences to actually bring nature onto your site? And then Doing that, how do you create opportunities for learners to actually access that nature as well? That doesn't even necessarily have to be on your site. Obviously, around Maidstone, we have some fantastic parks and open spaces, and therefore, could it be that you instead are actually taking young people out to those open spaces if you yourself don't have the grounds to facilitate that? Another important area is developing the skills and confidence of learners to take care of that local environment. So I would say biodiversity and that connection with nature, that's a really, really good way to actually foster those pro-environmental behaviours at a really young age. Particularly if any of you are early years teachers, for example, and early years leads, I would say that's a really, really key area to look at, those pro-environmental behaviours. There's a lot of evidence to show that developing those behaviours at a very young age actually creates an adult ultimately who has quite a pro-environmental kind of mindset, but also looking at using the school environment as a living lab as well. So what can young people learn from the outside space? And actually, instead of always teaching about things on a screen, could they go out and experience some of this as well? And then the final area to cover is climate education and green careers. So we want to prepare students for a world impacted by climate change through education and practice. What does this look like in practice? So instead of just looking at climate education in geography and science, we want to look at this across the whole curriculum. Now, I know that there is a curriculum review going at the minute, and I also know that climate education and sustainability are not featured anywhere else on the curriculum other than in geography and science. However, it doesn't mean to say that they can't be featured. Those themes can't be featured across the curriculum or within cross-disciplinary projects like it says up here. So for example, in English, could there be a persuasive letter written to your local MP talking about environmental challenges? Or within art, could you do a project using recycled items only? Or within economics, could you have a little bit of a conversation about the circular economy? Within religious studies, actually, this fits in very nicely in terms of, and if you are a C of E school, Catholic school, there will be a lot of values that actually cross over with kind of those pro-environmental behaviours as well. So one of the best ways to look at the climate education area is to actually go away and ask your subject leads to do a little bit of a curriculum audit and to work out and to see if there are any areas sorry, just had someone come in. There we go. So to see if there are any areas where you could better embed some sort of climate education within. Green skills and green careers, that's another area I should talk about quickly. So we know that there are going to be a lot more green careers moving forward, and this green sector is growing hugely. One thing I would say, though, is that green careers are not necessarily just those old-fashioned green careers. In actual fact, there is a lot of evidence to show now that pretty much every job type is going to have an element of sustainability featured in it. You're all sat here today as teachers or senior leaders within schools. At no point did you possibly think you'd be sat at a webinar talking all about sustainability and how you can make your school more sustainable, but you are. And that's the same with every sector across the country and across the world, actually. And so to be able to prepare these young people for a career that, yes, will have elements of sustainability is very important. And then obviously also to inspire and see if there are any young people and provide those opportunities through things like green careers talks, green careers weeks and things like that, or work experience placements within those career areas. Another important part of this, again, back to what I said at the beginning, is about empowering. How can we empower learners to have the confidence and skills to take climate action? Can we do that through cross-disciplinary projects at school? Can we do that through something like an eco club, which some of you might have already? And then once again, providing students with the skills and opportunities to pursue green careers. So those skills do not necessarily mean just sitting there and learning about what climate change is. In actual fact, those skills likely will mean more practical skills or potentially things like critical thinking, for example. Climate change is a huge societal issue. So can our young people actually be critical of these things and actually go on to actually kind of think for themselves about how to combat these challenges? They're really important skills to teach our learners at this young age. So The Department for Education have not actually published an official template. The reason that they haven't done this is because they are aware that every education setting, bearing in mind their strategy goes all the way from early years right through to higher education, there is not going to be a one-size-fits-all template, for a climate action plan. However, we as a programme have been asked a lot about templates and what a climate action plan looks like. And so we have actually gone and developed a template, which the DfE have seen and said, yes, looks good. There are a number of different templates out there. I must admit, most of them look like this because essentially it's a very, very simple kind of action planning or strategic document saying actions, whether you're linking things to improvement plan, having and identifying who is responsible and key stakeholders, looking at timescales, thinking about the information and resources you require, and then looking at your target and measures and your progress as well. What I'm going to do after this, for everyone that's attended, I'm going to send out this template in a Word document form, because the idea is that you can take away this template and you can modify and edit it however you think best. I've also got a whole guidance document on what a climate action plan template is, and with some examples and more support as well, which I will also send you. But just to say, there is a template out there and there is more information out there through other templates as well. One of the best places to start with climate action planning is thinking about what you have already achieved. Ultimately, what you have already achieved will be the foundation for your climate action plan. So as one of the first actions I would encourage you to do to go away from this webinar is to sit with people and to think about all of the different things that you have done that are related to climate action, sustainability, anything eco related. List everything you've done and put it into one of those 4 areas. Think about the action. Have you got LED lighting, for example? Have you done a walk to school campaign? Do you recycle? Have you done a presentation on Earth Day or something like that? There are loads and loads of different things that you have done probably. And one of the biggest things to say is that schools do not realise how much they're already doing in this area. So actually getting it all on paper, separating it into those areas, helps you to realise that you're already taking a lot of action, but also hopefully helps to spark some of those new ideas as well. And from that is where I would encourage you to go with your climate action plan. And that is what I would encourage you to do next. We have created a planning and delivery report. I will be sending these slides out to you as well, by the way, in a PDF format. So please don't worry about scanning that now, but you can scan it later. And this is a simple Microsoft form that our impact evaluation team are using, but also can actually help you to understand some of the questions that might be worth asking of your education setting, including breaking down those 4 key areas too. At the end of the Microsoft form, you can type your email address in, and then you will actually be sent the responses, including the questions. Therefore, you can pull some of that across and say, right, we aren't doing that. Let's think about doing this instead. So just a helpful little tool to use. Now on to the support and next steps. So as part of the Department for Education's climate change strategy, they did not want to leave you without help ultimately. And so what they have done is they have funded several programs to support you with climate action planning. And they're up here on the screen right now. 3 of these are funded by the Department for Education. The only one that isn't is Let's Go Zero. They are funded by climate action charity Ashton, a fantastic organisation. However, they work very closely with the rest of us. So the 4 of us make up kind of that official support that ties into the Department for Education's sustainability and climate change strategy. One thing I would say though is there is so much more support out there. And one of our jobs as 4 projects is to actually point you in the direction of that support. Okay, so there is a lot of help out there. Anything that you do with any of these 4 organisations is entirely free. That's one thing I would say. Okay, so this is fully funded support. First one is the project that I work for. So Climate Ambassadors. So our aim is to help education settings within England access support from volunteer climate ambassadors who can help them with developing and delivering the climate action plans. So ultimately, what we have got across England now is over 1,000 volunteers who work in the environmental space, either from the private, public, charity, university sectors, or it might be that they do a lot of community work. And what they want to do is actually put that climate change and sustainability knowledge to work. They will help education settings deliver meaningful change on sustainability climate change. And climate ambassadors are all fully DBS checked and have undertaken some introductory training to help them understand climate action plans with relation to schools and the education sector. But also they have access to loads of additional training and resources that can help them help you. So essentially, these are individuals that want to volunteer their time to come and support you as an individual school with climate action planning. They will happily work with leaders, staff, young people, or governors, okay? So they do not have to necessarily just work with young people, which is what a lot of people think. They will actually happily come and work with you as the staff team as well. The way that this works is you would come to me and say to me, right, this is the support that we need. I then put that out to my volunteers, and then I wait for the volunteers to come back to me and say, yep, I'm very happy to go and help with that school. The approach that we're trying to take is quite a local approach. So as much as possible, we try and pair schools up with volunteers that are local to them. You can ask for support from climate ambassadors for just about anything. Obviously, we cannot absolutely guarantee that we're going to have that support there, but hopefully we're going to have something similar to the support that you want. What I would say we have a lot of is individuals that are very happy to help you at this early stage in terms of working out what you're doing as a school already and your next steps in developing that climate action plan, because that is what we do a lot of training around with our climate ambassadors at the minute. So it might be they help with that first step, okay, that getting started creating and progressing your climate action plan. At the same time, we've also got a lot of people who happily come in and do that inspiring piece as well. So coming in and doing a presentation, for example, to your young people or even to your staff, for example, on an inset day. Individuals also will have specialisms. So we have got individuals, for example, that specialise within that decarbonisation area or within biodiversity or maybe within climate education. So if you already have a climate action plan or feel quite comfortable about developing one, but there's a few actions you're unsure about, it might be that you want to come to me and say, we'd actually really like some help in this area. And then I could ask and see if we've got any volunteers. Just to say, if we don't have any volunteers, I am your backup and I can also support. And as well as that, we then have the other programs that we then cross-refer to as well. So please, just any help you think you need, just come to me and I will be able to get you help in some form or another. To request a climate ambassador, basically just email me, as I've just said. And what I will do is I will walk you through the process. We do use a digital platform. The digital platform is called STEM Learning. Some of you may have heard of it already and may be aware of the program STEM Ambassadors. Climate Ambassadors was originally an extension to the program STEM Ambassadors. So they were focused on very much that green careers topic. However, as the program has developed, we've kind of detached slightly from that. And now we support in other areas as well. But we still use that digital platform for pairing up schools and volunteers. Now, the next area of support that we can provide is through sustainability support for education. This is an online hub, basically. It's a website and a key source of information on developing and delivering your climate action plan. Again, it's entirely free and it's an online service which helps to inspire and equip all education settings in England with the next steps on sustainability. The easiest thing to actually do here is very, very quickly show you the website because it makes a lot more sense. So I'm quickly just stopping sharing and now hopefully I'm sharing again. So hopefully you can see this now. So this is the Sustainability Support for Education website. This is the homepage. You can log in and then you can actually fill in your education setting information. So you will say kind of, you can put your postcode in, number of students, etc., and create an account. What I would then encourage you to do is have a little explore of the website. Okay. What they've done on this homepage is they have allowed you to actually click into one of 5 stages. A lot of you, I expect, are at this setting the groundwork and taking the first steps. So if you view this stage, they've then got lots of different actions which could be pulled straight through into a climate action plan. For example, if you are creating a climate action plan, do you want to arrange sustainability training for your key decision makers? Or if you want to understand what support is, do you want to look for support from your local authority? So clicking into these actually then provides more actions and more information as well. The thing that I would probably argue is even more helpful, though, is by looking via topic. So, for example, if we're looking into biodiversity, could we complete a biodiversity assessment? We click into that and it gives you some more information about what a biodiversity assessment is. And then it will allow you to click through into a number of different resources, which have all been quality assured and checked by the Sustainability Support for Education team. And then you'll be able to click through into one of these and get help with that. So there's loads and loads of different actions. The other thing you can also do is you can actually click and save this to a list. So you can see that I've been helping, this is actually a nursery, I've been helping a nursery with their climate action plan, but you can actually then add something to a list and then it will sit on that list. You can then go into your account and you can actually look at your education set. Oh, no, you can't there. You can look at your saved, sorry, and then you'll actually have almost like a climate action plan built right here. So you'll have loads of different actions with all the support available. So I'd really encourage you just to have a proper explore through the Sustainability Support for Education website. And there are some fantastic webinars actually available as well, which I would try and find the links for and send them to you for how to use that site and get the most out of that site as well. Right, hopefully you can see my slides again. So that is Sustainability Support for Education. The next programme is called the National Education Nature Park. This is one that quite a lot of people have heard of. It is being run by a collaboration of loads of different organisations, but being led by the Royal Horticultural Society and the Natural History Museum. It is essentially a free programme helping to put nature at the heart of education. You might remember really early at the beginning, I mentioned about how if we combine all education settings in England, we will have an area twice the size of Birmingham. That is the idea behind this project, okay? It's creating one giant nature park. In this image here, you'll see loads of light green dots. They are all the schools that have actually got involved, signed up and done what's called mapping of their site. And that is what we would encourage you to do. So it's a 5-step process that you can adopt, or you can just use the site and the GIS software and things like that in a different way. So the first step is getting to know your site. So this is actually marking out your boundary and mapping your site through lots of different fun activities that you can do with your students. With your young people, you then identify opportunities of where you can maybe make changes and help support nature thrive. And then with students, actually make decisions on the differences you're going to make. Then implement those projects and make those changes and then record that change. And it's a little circular project, and so you could keep going and going and going with loads of different ideas on your school grounds. The other fantastic thing they have though is a giant resource library of curriculum linked resources that again have all been quality assured. You can filter by subject, by key stage, by duration, nature park step, etc, etc. So you can basically filter by whatever topic you like and you will get lots and lots of resources. They do obviously largely the resources focus around that biodiversity pillar. However, they also do have quite a number of climate education resources as well, and they do have resources all the way through from early years right the way through to kind of sixth form age as well. This is an example of a school that have actually used the nature park. So what they did is they mapped their site. They found that they had an area of their school which is south facing that got very, very hot. That classroom in particular got very, very hot. And so what they did is they actually planted some vertical planting. And as you can see from the heat maps here, it's actually helped to cool that area down and in turn actually helped to cool the classroom. So this is a project which has also helped with that adaptation and resilience pillar. So it's about using nature and seeing the co-benefits of nature as well. So I'd really encourage you to go and register your school for the National Education Nature Park and complete your site boundary. Again, this will all be included on the follow-up slides, so please don't feel like you have to go and do it now. And then finally, I just want to mention Let's Go Zero. Some of you may have already been involved with Let's Go Zero and their fantastic climate action advisors, but Let's Go Zero is basically a national campaign for all schools, colleges and nurseries to be zero carbon by 2030. Now, the first caveat to say this is by signing up to this, you are not absolutely committing to get to net zero by 2030. As we mentioned very early, systematically, it's quite hard to get to net zero by 2030 right now because of lots of things that are well out of a school's control. However, the initial idea behind the campaign was actually to show the government the appetite from the education sector that they want to see a movement and see change happen. They've actually now got over 7,500 education settings signed up, but they want more. And like I say, this is not you absolutely committing to be net zero by 2030, but it is saying, right, we want to see change and we want to be part of that change. And as that campaign gets more and more signatories, obviously that voice and that message gets bigger when it's then taken through to the government. The other thing that Let's Go Zero have, though, is a whole team of what's called climate action advisors. And these are individuals that can actually help, again, very similarly to climate ambassadors, support with climate action planning. Okay, so it might be that you are really stuck with this and you need some proper hand holding, and I would suggest that climate action advisors are really good support for that, and can come and help. The only caveat is that they are full-time employed individuals. The problem is there are not loads of them. I think there's about 36 of them all around the country, and so they obviously have limits to how much work they can do. However, if you want support from one of them, do have a look and go on to Let's Go Zero and click on the climate action advisors. It might be, if they're very busy at the minute, we can get you some initial support from a climate ambassador, and then you go on to do things like sustainability audits with the Let's Go Zero team. So we all, like I say, work in partnership very closely with one another. I want to quickly pass over to Angela, because Angela from Maidstone Borough Council has got a couple of slides just to say about how the local authority can support as well.
Hi, thanks, Gemma. Yeah, a lot of amazing resources from your side, so that's really good to see. I'm going to keep this really brief so that there's time for questions, but I'm Maidstone Borough Council's Biodiversity and Climate Change Engagement Officer, and I just wanted to briefly include a few of the sort of offers we've got for local schools at the moment. So basically, we can arrange visits. We've been going into schools to do visits, so we can do assemblies, whole school assemblies if that suits you better, or like class sessions with specific age groups. We can tailor this accordingly. So recycling at home, along with Suez, who are our waste contractor. So Gemma mentioned earlier about the new legislation on recycling, especially including food waste, which is now mandatory in all organisations, including schools. So over time, you will have to sort of start doing that. I know not all schools are on board yet. That will be through your contractor. That won't be through us. But what we found is going into schools and talking about household recycling and the separation and how to do that correctly is also really useful. So also tree planting, related to what Gemma's been saying. So we have, as a borough, a target of 5% increase in tree cover and 10% on hedges. I should have included hedges there because I think hedgerows is really important for schools. So in small spaces, blocking air pollution, there's a myriad of benefits there, and wind. Gemma mentioned wind earlier, so a nice wind block there. So yeah, get in touch with us. There's on the last slide, there's my contact details, my team's contact details, and also how you can sign up to the newsletter. Sorry, if you could just go back, Gemma. So yeah, so these are the sort of things that we're offering. Assemblies on water saving advice, food waste recycling, pollution patrol, which is a Kent County Council campaign that we're helping them promote. So yeah, if you give me the next slide, please, Gemma. And the Eco Hub, if anyone is familiar with it, is an annual event from Maidstone Borough Council and community groups. So this year it's going to be in Maidstone Mall again in October. The dates are on the slide. And this year we'd like to offer closed door sort of sign up events for schools to come and bring groups of pupils to do workshops and explore the hub as a school group. So these are the things that we're planning already. So the team repair, which were extremely popular last year. So that would be for 10 to 14-year-olds, so fixing real life electronics. And then some composting, wildlife friendly gardening for all ages, and a climate fresque, which is an interactive climate change workshop aimed at 9 and above. And last year we had an art competition, which we opened up to all schools. So we will be doing that again. Details to be confirmed. So all of this will be published in the newsletter, which is on the next slide. Again, this is going to be shared. You don't have to do it now. You can sign up to our environmental services one as well, which has all sorts of recycling advice and what's going on with that for the borough. And please get in touch on the email at the bottom of this slide with me and my team, my colleagues. So we're interested in offering any additional local support that we can. So back to you, Gemma. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela. And it's really great to hear about what you could get, the support you can get from local authority. Once again, like I say, please do, for any help, just reach out to people basically, because we will be able to direct you and navigate you to the right people. So quickly, just a few next steps. Like I said right at the beginning, I would encourage you to assess what you've already achieved, but also to go away and share your learnings with others in your school. I'll share this PDF, this presentation as a PDF with you all, including with some live links and some additional links as well, so that you can go and explore all the resources and support programs as well. From that, I would encourage you to see who is keen in your school to get involved, but also make sure that you've engaged with the right people. Like I said earlier, the estates management team, the governors, and your senior leadership team as well. And then looking at your context and finding your baseline for each of the 4 key action areas. So for your curriculum, seeing where sustainability, environmental messaging is already featured, where could it be featured? For decarbonisation, I would encourage you to use an online tool called Count Your Carbon, which you can actually, again, I'll provide a link to it, which you can actually get a carbon footprint on for free. And that's designed specifically for schools. For adaptation and resilience, I'll provide you with some links that can help you to actually analyse and work out your climate risk moving forward into the future. And for biodiversity, signing up to the nature park and doing a little bit of a biodiversity assessment of your grounds. And then from that, beginning and reviewing your climate action plan. So that was everything from me. I'm sorry, it's a really quick whistle stop tour. It's very hard to do everything in an hour. However, like I say, in the follow-up information, I'll provide some additional information. But please do just email me, send me any questions and queries that you've got. I've got a few minutes now for questions. So please, any questions you've got, either pop in the chat, or I will now unmute. Well, if you would like to unmute yourself, if you would like to talk, and I can answer any questions. Or we might not have any questions, which is absolutely fine as well. What I'll do quickly is I'll stop recording as well.